A man kneels beside a German shepherd in the snow, placing a collar around her neck with trembling hands. Behind him, 4 puppies whimper softly in a crate. Then he looks up, toward flashing blue lights in the distance. He thought saving her was the end of the story, but what if it was only the beginning? Portland's sky was a cracked porcelain bowl that night, snow pouring through every seam of silence. Wind howled like some ancient grief returning to haunt the city, battering the neon signs and swirling dust into frozen daggers. The streets lay abandoned, as if the cold had emptied the world of motion. At the wheel of his delivery truck sat Owen Tisdale, a man of 52 winters, all of them carved deep into the lines of his sun-worn face. His frame was broad, but tired, the kind of tired that doesn't just settle into the bones, it stains the soul. He had once been a firefighter, the kind who would run into burning buildings while others fled. But 2 years ago, cancer took his wife, and with her went the fire in him. Now, he lived alone in a modest one-story house, with silence his only companion and the hum of the engine the only thing that reminded him he was still moving. That night, he was on a late shift delivering refurbished electronics across the north end of Portland. He didn't mind the hours. There were fewer people, fewer questions. Snow blanketed the windshield in horizontal streaks, and the wipers groaned in protest. Owen adjusted his glasses, leaning forward when he caught a movement, a dark, unmoving shape at the edge of an intersection near an old bus stop shelter. At first, he thought it was a bundle of trash, but as the headlights passed over, it moved. Barely. A slow, deliberate flinch against the ice. He slowed the truck, more out of instinct than intent. When he stepped down from the cab, the cold knifed into his skin through the heavy-duty canvas jacket. His boots crunched over salted slush. And then he saw it clearly. A dog. No, a German shepherd, curled tightly around something. Her fur was matted and dusted with snow, her body shivering with effort. She faced the wind, shielding what lay beneath her. 4 newborn puppies, eyes still shut, tiny bodies twitching with the last flickers of warmth. She was positioned like a shield, muscles taut, ears flattened back, lips pulled slightly, not in aggression, but in warning. Nova, though he did not yet know her name, was no ordinary stray. She had the dignified profile of a trained dog, but it had been long since she'd known safety. Her ribs jutted out beneath her tawny black coat, and one paw was curled unnaturally, as though injured. Yet her eyes, dark, intelligent, and sunken with exhaustion, locked onto Owen's. He took a cautious step forward. "Hey, it's okay, girl," he murmured, his voice hoarse from disuse. "I'm not here to hurt you." Nova didn't growl, didn't flinch. She simply blinked once, then turned her face slightly toward her pups, as if asking for mercy not for herself, but for them. Owen exhaled slowly. "God help me," he muttered, pulling the thick blanket from the back seat of his truck. He knelt in the snow, the cold soaking through his jeans, and gently placed the blanket over the puppies. Nova remained still. Only when he began tucking them in, one by one, did she finally collapse. Not from fear, just surrender. As he lifted the entire bundle, Nova included, into his arms, he felt how light she was. Lighter than she should be. Her body trembled against him, but she made no move to escape. Owen tucked them into the passenger seat, started the engine, and turned the heat as high as it would go. The windshield fogged up immediately. He didn't know what the hell he was doing, but he knew he couldn't leave them there. Across the city, in a cramped newsroom lit by flickering fluorescence, Amara Quinn, 26, leaned back from her cluttered desk. She was slight and sharp-eyed, with a streak of auburn hair constantly falling across her glasses. A journalism major turned crime beat intern. She was dogged, perhaps to a fault, driven not by ambition, but by the quiet shame of growing up with a father who let too many truths go unchallenged. For weeks now, she'd been investigating a string of dog thefts from shelters and homes, cases no one wanted to take seriously, but something about them didn't sit right. Too many too fast. She pulled up a recent batch of public street cam footage and began sifting through it. Then, frame 2147, a man in a worn parka cradling what looked like a pile of fur. Zoom, pause, enhance. It wasn't fur, it was puppies, and the man was carrying them away from a bus stop known for frequent stray reports. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Who was he? A savior? Or a link in the black market chain? She saved the still and wrote a note to herself. Find this man, tomorrow. And in another part of the city, behind a desk of neat folders and a mug that said, Trust no one, sat Elias Kane, 40, tall, with the kind of trim build that came from years of routine and just enough distrust to never let himself grow soft. Elias worked internal investigations for ClearTrack Logistics, and his world was paper trails, surveillance footage, and red flags. A recent anomaly in delivery patterns had triggered his attention. Multiple drivers on the same night routes, overlapping shipments, missing manifests. One name kept coming up, Owen Tisdale. He looked at the timestamp on Owen's last confirmed location and raised an eyebrow, right near one of the flagged drop points. Coincidence? Maybe. But Elias didn't believe in coincidence. He leaned forward, tapping into the company's GPS logs. I'm watching you, Mr. Tisdale, he muttered. Let's see what you're hiding. Back in his driveway, Owen parked the truck and gently carried Nova and the pups into his house. The heater was on, but the air still had that winter hollowness. He laid them down on an old dog bed he'd kept for years in the garage, originally meant for the golden retriever Mary had always wanted. He never bought the dog, just the bed, just in case. Nova didn't move at first. She curled tightly around the pups, breathing shallow but steady. Owen sat cross-legged beside them, staring at her. You should have died out there, he whispered, more to himself than her. But you didn't, and now you're here. Guess we're stuck with each other. Somewhere deep in her chest, Nova made a sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a sigh, just acknowledgement. Outside, the snow fell in thick sheets, covering all traces of what had happened at that lonely street corner. But in that small house on 83rd and Alder, a spark had flickered back to life, in both man and beast. Neither of them knew it yet, but this night would become the first line of a story far larger than either had bargained for. The sun never truly rose that morning, only a pale light seeped through the heavy Portland sky, filtering through frozen tree branches and clinging to windshields like a memory that refused to thaw. Inside Owen's truck, the heater struggled against the remnants of the night storm. Nova lay curled on the passenger seat floor, her breathing shallow, the blanket tucked loosely over her, and the four small bodies nestled into her belly. One pup, smaller than the rest, moved less. Owen glanced down, his hand resting on the wheel, then back again. His gut twisted. He didn't think. He just drove. The Reyes Animal Clinic was located in a corner block of a quiet residential district, an old red brick building with green shutters and a carved wooden sign hanging above the frosted door. Inside, it smelled faintly of antiseptic and oatmeal shampoo. The waiting area was small, lined with faded posters warning about flea seasons and heartworm. Owen stepped inside, carefully carrying the bundle of life in his arms, his voice quiet but urgent as he approached the front desk. Behind the reception counter sat a woman in her late 50s, glasses hanging on a beaded chain around her neck, eyes sharp but warm. Leona Park, the clinic's administrator and longtime assistant, had worked with animals since she was 16, back when her father used to rescue greyhounds off racing tracks. She was short and wide-hipped, with the kind of brisk tenderness only found in women who'd bottle-fed both puppies and soldiers home from war. "Walk in?" she asked, then spotted the bundle. "Oh, sweet mercy. Room 3, I'll get Glenn." Dr. Glenn Reyes entered not a minute later, tall, lean, with olive skin and a face lined by both age and patience. Glenn was a man of calm hands and quiet eyes. In his early 60s, he moved with practiced efficiency, his lab coat already half-buttoned. He had once served as a mobile veterinarian with international rescue teams, earthquake zones, flooded plains, civil wars. He'd seen animals in worse shape than Nova, but not many. He motioned for Owen to place them on the exam table, a padded surface surrounded by heat lamps and sterile trays. Nova flinched as he approached, eyes wary but not aggressive. Glenn paused, lowered his posture, and spoke gently. "She's a mother. She's scared. Let her know we're here to help." Nova didn't move as Owen gently placed the pups on the table. Glenn began his examination without a word, starting with the smallest, its tiny body barely rising with breath. "This one's critical," he said after a moment. "Hypothermia, Possibly underdeveloped lungs. Owen didn't know why he whispered, "Can you save it?" "We'll try." The remaining three were weak but responsive. Glenn checked their temperatures, monitored heartbeats, and prepared fluid injections. Leona moved around them like a ghost, retrieving supplies, adjusting the heat. Meanwhile, Glenn turned to Nova, kneeling to check her condition. He pushed back her fur near the ear, and stopped. There, partially obscured by scar tissue and dirt, was a small faded tattoo, R2S019A. Glenn frowned. "This is a registration mark, government issue, working dog." He turned to Owen. "Where did you find her?" Owen hesitated, his voice low. "She was shielding them under a bus stop. Middle of nowhere, just holding on." Glenn nodded, but his brows furrowed. "This isn't from a shelter. This is from a tactical unit." Owen looked at Nova, then at the pups. "What does it mean?" "It means," Glenn said, "she was trained. She belonged to someone who put her through hell, and then they discarded her." As Glenn continued to treat the family, Owen sat on the edge of the room, watching. Slowly he began to murmur names to the pups as he counted them again. "That one's Red. He's got fire. The Wriggler, maybe Mags. And this little guy." He picked up the smallest, whose breathing now steadied under the heat lamp. "You'll be Juno." The name clung to the room like breath on glass. In another part of the city, Amara Quinn stood across the street from Rhea's animal clinic, her coat pulled tight against the wind. Her dark eyes were fixed on the building, camera bag slung over her shoulder, breath fogging in the cold. She'd followed the man from the night before, the man who carried the puppies from the snow, and traced him here. She'd called the city's animal registration office, cross-referenced the street corner and license plates, and learned just enough to know this wasn't random. Amara moved with quiet intensity. At 26, she bore the shadow of her brother's disappearance, a brother who once adopted a pit bull that vanished weeks before he did. No one ever found either of them. Since then, she chased every missing animal report like it might tie back to a deeper wound. She pushed the door open, feigning calm. "Hi," she said to Leona. "I'm doing a piece on winter dangers for strays. Any chance I can speak with a vet or grab a quick comment?" Leona studied her. "No press inside exam rooms. You can wait." Amara nodded and sat, careful not to seem too eager. Her eyes flicked to the door marked Room 3. She heard nothing, but her instincts prickled. Something big was behind that door. Back downtown, Elias Kane stood in the server room of ClearTrack Logistics, the cool blue light of the monitors reflecting off his clean-shaven jaw. He wore a gray turtleneck under a sharp blazer, a far cry from the dusty boots and flannel of his earlier years in the field. Elias was meticulous and calculating, his attention to detail bordering on obsessive. He never acted without three contingencies. He tapped a few keys and pulled up delivery route histories. His eyes narrowed. A set of unassigned tracking codes had appeared repeatedly near industrial zones, the same regions flagged in last month's internal audit. He isolated one particular code, Route 87APDX, assigned to Owen Tisdale. "Why do you keep showing up, Mr. Tisdale?" he murmured. He extracted the files onto an encrypted drive, then inserted a hidden camera into one of the loading docks. If someone was funneling animals through their shipments, he'd find out. And if Owen was part of it, willingly or not, he would be exposed. Back at the clinic, Owen stood by the door, about to leave. Nova rested on a blanket, her eyes half-lidded, but no longer defensive. The pups slept close to her now, bodies full and warm. Glenn approached, removing his gloves. "They'll need monitoring, regular feeding every 2 hours for the little one. I can keep them here if—" "No," Owen said, surprising himself. "They stay with me. I'll bring them back if anything worsens." Glenn studied him for a moment. Then he nodded. "You've got a good heart. Just don't burn it out trying to fix what others broke." Owen carried the small crate back to his truck with a quiet determination. Outside, snow had stopped falling. In the distance, Amara scribbled notes into her pocket journal, then began walking away. And from a parking lot across the street, hidden behind tinted windows, Elias watched through binoculars, noted the plate, logged the time. All three had begun their moves, none knowing yet how closely their paths were beginning to intertwine, and inside the crate, beneath a second-hand blanket, Nova finally closed her eyes. Not in surrender, in trust. It was still dark when Owen stepped into the yard, the cold biting against his cheeks. Frost clung to the edges of his porch railings like veins of glass, and the silence around his small suburban house felt heavier than usual. In the stillness, he could hear the soft whimper of a puppy from the bedroom window. He turned back toward the door, hesitant. Inside, Nova was pacing slowly around the edge of the living room rug, her nails ticking against the hardwood. She paused each time she passed the window, her ears twitching, her tail stiff. Her breath came out in short bursts, and her eyes, normally guarded, looked wired with silent panic. Owen reached toward the coat rack for his flashlight and clicked it on. The beam of light hit the floor, and Nova instantly flinched. Her body dropped low, belly pressed to the floor, ears pinned back. She let out a deep, involuntary growl, not of aggression, but pure reflex. Owen turned the light off immediately, his heart cracking as he whispered, "It's okay, girl. It's just me." He watched her crawl backward and huddle beside the crate where her 4 puppies slept. She placed her body between them and the source of the light, her breathing shallow. Owen knelt slowly, setting the flashlight aside. That reaction hadn't come from fear of the light. It had come from training. Harsh, repeated commands enforced with pain and punishment. He saw it now, in the way she avoided sudden movement, the way her eyes tracked corners and doors, her hypersensitivity to noise. Someone had shaped her through fear, and then discarded her. Later that morning, with Nova asleep and the puppies nursing, Owen sat at the kitchen table, laptop open. The tattoo code Glenn had found, R2S019A, had gnawed at him all night. He'd typed variations of it into every database he could find until he stumbled across a defunct website, archived through an old military contractor directory, SRK Kennels. The page was bare bones, just a logo and a mission statement about tactical canine training for law enforcement and security services. But tucked into the bottom corner was a single sentence. R2S units, elite response. Shepherd 019A through 024A, delivered Q for 2021. Nova, she was one of them. The site had been shut down. No contact info, no client list, just dust on digital shelves. But the logo stayed burned in his vision, 3 interlocking rings overlaid with a paw print, a symbol he'd later recognize on Nova's old collar, buried under layers of grime in the corner of her crate. The phone rang. He picked it up without thinking, still reading. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then a low voice crackled through the receiver. Male, measured, almost calm. "You're in possession of a unit that doesn't belong to you." Owen's spine straightened. "Who is this?" "I'll say it once. Walk away, before you lose more than a dog." Then silence. Owen didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there, hand frozen around the phone. Across town, Amara Quinn stood in front of a sprawling corkboard inside her apartment. Her place was a mess of notebooks, takeout containers, and newspaper clippings, pushpins, connected maps, photos of lost dogs, and shadowy reports of a breeding ring operating under the name Shadow Tales. She had found something new. A scanned shipping manifest marked Q3 Animal Units, SRK. It wasn't supposed to be public. It had been buried in a leaked set of documents connected to a logistics scandal 2 years ago. But her tech friend at the paper had decrypted the watermark. One line caught her eye. Vet signature G. Reyes, consultant contract, 6 months. She froze. Dr. Glenn Reyes. She remembered him clearly, composed, kind, clinical. But why had his name appeared on a manifest linked to a shady training facility? She didn't know if he'd been a contractor, a consultant, or a pawn. But she intended to find out. And Owen Tisdale? He wasn't just some loner. He was now tangled in something far bigger than he knew. At the edge of the supermarket parking lot, Owen loaded a bag of canned dog food and a thermal puppy blanket into the back of his truck. The cart wobbled over a patch of ice as he turned to climb into the driver's seat. "Mr. Tisdale!" The voice was clean, polite, and completely out of place. He turned. The man standing before him looked like he belonged in a corporate seminar, not a parking lot. Elias Kane, early 40s, with dark blonde hair cut with regulation neatness, a charcoal wool coat buttoned to the neck, and leather gloves that hadn't seen a callus in years. His posture was precise, and his eyes, an unblinking steel gray, never left Owen's face. "I'm Elias. I work with security compliance for ClearTrack Logistics. We've had some anomalies in delivery routes lately. Just doing routine follow-ups. Owen frowned. Security compliance? You normally do those in the frozen food section? Elias smiled thinly. Sometimes the field gives clearer answers. What do you want? Elias took a slow step forward. One of our flagged zones overlaps with your assigned route last week. We're just trying to trace any off-manifest packages. You didn't see anything unusual? No unauthorized pickups? Owen felt the pressure building. I deliver TVs and microwaves, no puppies. I never said anything about puppies, Elias said, his smile gone. For a beat, the two men stood locked in quiet tension. Then Elias straightened his coat. If you remember anything, even a stray animal that looked out of place, call this number. He handed Owen a card. It was blank except for a number scrawled in pen. Have a good day, Mr. Tisdale. He walked away without another word. Owen didn't breathe until the sedan pulled out of the lot and vanished around the corner. That night, back at home, he sat beside Nova and the pups. They were warm now, settled under a donated heat lamp Glenn had given him from the clinic. Juno, the runt, nuzzled into Nova's side, making faint cooing sounds. Owen stared at the flickering shadows on the wall. SRK had trained her. Someone wanted her back, or silenced. Amara was out there chasing the same ghost from a different angle, and now this Elias Kane character, he wasn't with some logistics department. He had the stance of a federal man, or worse, private intelligence. He'd been a firefighter. He'd seen what corruption could do. Fires started in boardrooms before they ever reached wood and wire. He picked up the phone. Glenn, I need to know more about Nova, about that tattoo. From the other end, Glenn's voice sounded unusually quiet. There are things I thought I'd left behind, Owen. But if you're asking this question, you may already be in deeper than you realize. I already am. Owen hung up. Then he looked at Nova. Her eyes were open, watching him. Not afraid this time, simply aware. We'll get to the bottom of this, he whispered. I promise. Outside, the cold returned. But inside, beneath heat lamps and unspoken bonds, something else had started to thaw. The air that morning was brittle with tension, the kind that settled not in the sky, but in the bones. Portland's streets were still wet with the remnants of last night's rain, and the clouds hung low, as if eavesdropping on the city's secrets. Owen stood on his porch, mug in hand, eyes fixed on the frost-fringed yard beyond the steps. Inside, Nova was curled around the pups, still alert despite her exhaustion. The image had become familiar, but the questions clawing at Owen's mind hadn't dulled. When the knock came, it wasn't loud, but it was confident. Owen opened the door to find a young woman standing in a navy trench coat, dark jeans tucked into worn boots, and a gray scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. Her short auburn hair was tousled by the wind, and her eyes, dark, observant, held a clarity that suggested she missed very little. She extended a hand, her grip firm. Amara Quinn, I think you've been waiting for someone like me. Owen raised an eyebrow. Have I? You've already been followed, questioned, threatened. You just haven't connected all the pieces yet. I have some of them. She paused, scanning his face. May I come in? He hesitated, then stepped aside. The interior was simple. Wood floors, old photographs, a scent of strong coffee and antiseptic. Amara took it in quickly, her gaze flicking toward the living room, where Nova lay resting. The pups stirred slightly, their muffled sounds drifting into the hallway. She's even more beautiful than I expected, Amara murmured. You've been watching us. I've been watching them, she corrected, and you just happened to stumble into their mess. Owen sat across from her at the kitchen table, arms folded. Start talking. Amara pulled out a leather-bound notebook, the corners frayed. She opened it to a page of scribbled diagrams, maps, names, symbols, all crisscrossed with arrows and dates. There's a network called Shadow Tales. They're not just trafficking stolen dogs. They're running covert breeding programs. XK9 units, dogs with specialized training, anything that fetches a premium price. Nova was one of them. You've already guessed that. He nodded slowly. SRK Kennels. They shut down officially 2 years ago, but only the legal shell. The real operation moved underground. The dogs from SRK were split. Some rehomed, most vanished. You rescued one that got away. Owen's jaw tightened. Why come to me now? Because I need proof. and you have the only one still alive with a verifiable tag and a surviving litter. She reached into her coat pocket and placed a flash drive on the table. These are manifests, smuggled transport schedules from ClearTrack Logistics, your company. I think someone's been using your routes to move animals. Owen stared at the drive, then at her. How did you get this? Amara offered a thin smile. Let's just say I know where to look. And I don't mind bending a few laws if the law won't bend for the truth. They sat in silence for a moment. You want to use Nova, he said finally, to draw them out. I want to protect her, Amara corrected. But yes, we can trace her trauma. Dogs don't forget smells, sounds, routes. We may be able to retrace her journey through Portland, if we're careful. Owen ran a hand over his jaw. She's just starting to trust me. I don't want to push her. Then don't do it for me, Amara said softly. Do it so no one else has to go through what she did. That evening, Owen sat on the floor of the living room, a map of Portland spread across the hardwood, Amara kneeling beside him. Nova sniffed cautiously at the colored pins they'd placed. Red for suspected drop sites, green for veterinary reports, blue for warehouses with flagged manifests. She stopped twice, tail low, ears tilted back, both times near areas associated with her former route. Instinct, Amara whispered. She remembers. But something shifted when Owen turned on a small recording, just a sample of sirens from an old K9 training tape. Nova bolted upright, teeth bared in silence, her body low to the ground, eyes locked on a corner of the room as if someone had stepped through the wall. Owen shut it off instantly, his voice breaking. Enough! Amara knelt beside the trembling dog, her hand extended but not touching. It's okay, girl. You're not there anymore. Nova leaned her head against Owen's knee. Several miles away, in an unmarked apartment with blackout curtains and a single lamp flickering against cracked plaster, Elias Kane sat at a steel desk, files spread in clinical rows. He wore a thin black sweater over his collared shirt, sleeves rolled precisely. He had just watched a security feed of a man entering a shipping hub in Hillsboro, someone Elias had seen once before, in a grainy background of a ClearTrack warehouse. Thomas Callan. Mid-50s, balding, lean, with a mouth that never smiled and eyes like broken glass. Once a logistics director for SRK. Now, supposedly retired. Except he wasn't. Elias leaned back. He knew this went deeper than transport violations. The chain of command extended higher than anyone wanted to admit, and his own superiors had refused his recent request to audit 2 facilities tied to the same manifest numbers. That was when he knew. He couldn't go up the chain, so instead, he was going to follow it sideways, right to Owen. At 2:17 a.m., Owen woke to the sound of Nova growling. Not barking. Growling. Deep, low, and constant. The sound of an animal warning something it didn't yet understand. He crept from the bedroom, heart thudding. The living room was bathed in blue from the nightlight over the crate. Nova stood rigid by the door, teeth bared, staring through the glass. Then she barked. Once. Loud, sharp, final. Owen rushed forward and saw it. The gate was open. The chain lock had been cut clean. Footprints in the frost, but no intruder in sight. Then he saw the mark. Carved into the wood of his front door, at chest height, was a small crude triangle intersecting 3 rings. Nova's tattoo. Except this one had been carved out of something else, glued in place, a warning. He backed away slowly, arms around Nova. Behind him, Amara stepped into the hallway, barefoot, holding her phone with trembling fingers. They were here. Yes, Owen whispered. And now they know we are too. Nova didn't stop growling until dawn. The cold that morning didn't come from the air. It came from the knowledge that someone had broken into Owen's property and left behind a silent threat. The door had been repaired, the footprint trail washed away by melting frost, but the memory remained, etched into the grain of the wood and into Nova's gaze. She had been quiet all morning, sticking close to her pups, flinching at every sound that came from beyond the window. Owen and Amara had barely spoken during breakfast. The tension hung between them, not born of distrust, but of shared fear. But by mid-morning, Owen stood in the garage, checking tire pressure and packing the back seat with a worn duffel bag, a blanket, and a thermos of coffee. Amara stood by the passenger door, holding a notepad and flipping through her scribbled notes. Mason Trent, she said, glancing up. Retired 5 years ago. Used to work with SRK under a side contract labeled Behavioral Modification Specialist. No public address, but I traced a utility bill to a cabin out in Estacada. No phone, no internet. Sounds like someone trying not to be found, Owen muttered, tightening the straps on Nova's crate. Or someone who knows what silence can protect. The drive to Estacada was long and mostly quiet. Pines lined the winding roads like sentinels, their branches heavy with frost. Nova rode in the back seat beside Amara, the puppies safe in a travel crate warmed by battery-heated pads Glenn had provided. Nova watched the road through the window, her ears occasionally twitching at distant sounds. She had stopped trembling, but not relaxing. More like a soldier waiting for the next order. The cabin appeared past a bend in the road, nestled among trees like it had grown there. It was modest, wooden siding, a metal roof streaked with rust, a stack of firewood arranged with precision on the porch. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and the scent of pine and old ash hung in the air. Mason Trent opened the door before they could knock. He was a man built like an old oak. Broad shoulders, thick arms, but a slight stoop that came from years of leaning toward dogs instead of people. His white hair was cropped close to his scalp, and his beard was trimmed with military neatness. He wore a brown flannel shirt and work pants, and his blue eyes, though dulled with age, were sharp with caution. He took one look at Nova and froze. 019A, he said, his voice a mix of awe and guilt. You found her. Owen nodded. We need to talk. Inside, the cabin was sparse but warm. A cast-iron stove heated the single room, and books lined the shelves, most on animal psychology, training theory, and military memoirs. A picture frame on the mantel held a faded photo of a younger Mason in fatigues, kneeling beside a German shepherd with almost identical markings to Nova. She was the best, Mason said, sitting heavily into an armchair. They bred her from 2 elite trackers, designed her for dual response, patrol and search. Smart as hell. But there was always something more in her, a heart they didn't know how to train. Owen and Amara listened in silence. Nova sat near the door, watching Mason with quiet recognition. She was injured during a mock breach exercise, tore her left shoulder, nothing that couldn't be treated. But she failed the next aggression trial, too cautious, too slow to respond. They labeled her unreliable, told me to sign off her retirement. And? Amara asked. Mason looked down at his hands. I didn't. I refused. Said she needed time, not replacement. What happened? Owen asked. They overruled me. Internal order. Called it an asset reassignment. Told me she'd be transferred to a recovery facility. 2 days later, she was gone. Amara leaned forward. Do you know where she went? Mason hesitated. No, but I suspected. They had started working with a third-party partner. Privately funded, no oversight. I saw records of other dogs being moved. They vanished too. Owen glanced at Nova. And you did nothing? I resigned, Mason said, his voice tightening. And I stayed quiet. Thought maybe if I didn't know, they wouldn't come for me next. Amara pulled out a small printed copy of the shipping manifest she'd shown Owen. Did you ever see this? Mason looked over the code. Yeah, that's one of theirs. Transport series for non-viables. I thought it meant euthanasia. He looked back at Nova. Now I know better. Back in Portland that evening, Glenn Reyes stood alone in the clinic's back room, reviewing blood work. Nova's test results were clean, but there was something else. He adjusted his glasses and leaned closer to the screen, highlighting a particular hormone level. He reached for the folder marked Post-Recovery Reproduction Notes and flipped through. Then he saw it. Previous gestational hormone traces, consistent with late-term pregnancy. A scan of her uterus post-arrival showed evidence of past cesarean scarring. He hadn't noticed it before. Her abdomen had been swollen with milk when she arrived, and the trauma made examination difficult. She'd been forced to give birth before, more than once. He stood in place, eyes unfocused. His mind drifted to a younger version of himself. Back in Haiti, during an earthquake response. A mother dog with a shattered leg, still nursing 3 pups in the rubble of a collapsed veterinary building. He had carried all 4 of them out on his back. That had been the moment he'd sworn to never look away from suffering again. He picked up the phone and called Owen. Meanwhile, Elias Kane sat in a parked sedan just outside the ClearTrack Central warehouse. A discreet audio relay fed directly into his earpiece, patched into an encrypted line he'd intercepted the week before. His laptop glowed with a waveform pattern, and as the voices rolled in, he scribbled notes into a pocket notebook with rigid efficiency. Two men were speaking. One was Thomas Callan, the logistics director Owen had unknowingly delivered near. The other, unidentified, but high-ranking, calculated. "We're pulling the plug. New facility goes online in Idaho within the month. Burn the old trail, all of it." "And the dogs still in rotation?" "Liquidate them. No trails, no stories, no survivors." Elias clenched his jaw. His fingers twitched toward the burner phone in his jacket, but he paused. If he moved now, they'd disappear for good. He needed proof. He needed names. He shut the laptop slowly and whispered, "Not yet." Owen sat in the cab of his truck, parked outside his house, phone pressed to his ear. "Late term?" he repeated. "Yes," Glenn said. "She's given birth before, not just this litter. Scars confirm at least 2 previous cycles. If they kept her alive after her injury, it wasn't out of mercy. It was for breeding." Owen looked through the windshield at the window glowing faintly inside his house. Nova's silhouette moved across it like a silent guardian. "How long," he asked softly, "before they come again?" There was no answer, only the sound of the wind rising in the pines beyond the road. The sky over Portland had turned steel gray by noon, cloaking the city in a hushed anticipation, as if the clouds themselves knew something was about to break. Amara adjusted the collar of her heavy coat as she stood in front of an anonymous warehouse in the industrial district near the rail yards. Her heart beat steadily beneath her layers, but her fingers trembled as she tightened them around the strap of her crossbody bag. She was alone this time, by design. She wore no press badge, no camera. Instead, her look had been curated carefully. Black slacks, sleek boots, an oversized cashmere coat, lips painted in a cold red. She had played this role before, once as an undercover student in a dogfighting ring bust. But this was different. This time, she was walking directly into a machine that had nearly destroyed Nova. The warehouse was nondescript, flanked by chain-link fences and unmarked trucks. Amara approached the steel door and rang the buzzer. A camera above the door whirred to life. "You're late," a voice crackled. "I got stuck behind a truck on I-84, she replied smoothly. "You still got the shepherd?" A pause. Then the lock clicked open. Inside, the air was thick with antiseptic and ammonia. The lighting was harsh, fluorescent strips humming above rows of stacked crates and cages. A man met her at the end of the corridor, tall, narrow-faced, with short brown hair and a scar above his left brow. His clothes were clean but generic. Jeans, a zipped hoodie, and gloves that looked too thin for the cold. His name, she would later learn, was Dale Rennick, mid-30s, ex-private security, and now a handler for the trafficking ring. "You're with Alcott, yeah?" Dale asked. His tone clipped. "Alcott's buyer," Amara replied. "He said you'd have something with tactical background." Dale smirked and gestured for her to follow. They walked past 3 rooms lined with cages, small dogs in some, larger ones in others. Most were silent, as if trained not to bark. Amara kept her expression neutral, her eyes soaking in every detail. In the 3rd room, Dale stopped. "She's fresh off cycle, military background, took some work to break her down, but she's calm now, recovering." He pointed to a monitor displaying security cam footage from a holding cell. The image showed a female German shepherd, gray-black coat, wide amber eyes, tied to a metal ring bolted into the floor. Her body trembled as she lay beside a steel bowl and a patch of matted bedding. Amara's stomach turned. "Did she have pups?" she asked. Dale glanced sideways. "Not our concern anymore. They're moved separately." Amara reached slowly into her bag, pretending to retrieve a phone. That's when the voice changed. "Who'd you say sent you again?" Dale asked, his tone shifting from casual to coiled. "Alcott," she replied, forcing calm into her voice. Dale's expression sharpened. "Funny. Alcott got raided 2 days ago in Spokane, and you don't smell like someone who buys dogs." Before Amara could respond, the lights in the hallway flickered. Dale stepped forward, his hand moving to the small of his back, towards something holstered. Amara didn't think. She turned and ran. Outside, Owen crouched in the alley behind the warehouse, his breath misting in front of him as he listened to the static-filled radio clutched in his hand. He hated this part. Waiting, powerless, watching shadows in motion. Nova was back home, safe with Glenn for the afternoon, but his mind kept flashing to her face the night she growled at the door. He hadn't seen that kind of terror in years, not since pulling a child from a house fire where the floor collapsed beneath them both. Beside him stood Elias Kane, no longer in disguise. The federal agent's badge had been clipped to his belt, barely visible beneath his long wool coat. Elias was built like someone who ran miles before coffee. His expression remained unreadable, but his voice, when he spoke, was calm and low. "She's been in there 12 minutes. That's too long." Owen turned toward him. "You sure this won't blow your cover?" "I've been off book since the moment my supervisor told me to ignore the clear track anomalies." Elias stood, drawing a compact pistol and attaching a silencer. "We move on my count." They circled toward the back entrance, just as Amara burst through a side door, breath ragged, eyes wide. Go now," she gasped. "They've got dogs in there. One of them might have been Nova." Then Dale appeared behind her with a baton drawn, but Elias moved faster. He tackled Dale to the ground in one fluid motion, restraining him with practiced force. Owen grabbed Amara's arm, pulling her away from the scuffle. In the chaos, Elias looked up. "Camera feeds, inside, back wall." Owen bolted toward the room, following the line of monitors Amara had described. He found the console and yanked the external hard drive from its port before Dale's backup could arrive. They regrouped in a rented storage unit an hour later. Owen stood over a folding table as Elias connected the salvaged hard drive to a laptop. The footage loaded slowly, frame by frame. Amara sat nearby, her coat streaked with dust, knuckles bruised from a scuffle in the stairwell. She said nothing, only stared at the screen. Then it appeared. A clip, time-stamped 6 months ago. A dimly lit room, the same ring bolt on the floor. A female German shepherd, tied down with a short leash. Panting, bleeding. A man crouched nearby, forcing something under her body. "Pause," Owen said, voice hoarse. "That's her." Nova. There was no doubt now. The camera zoomed closer. Her eyes were frantic, her body twisted in pain. And just behind her, a metal tray, filled with blood-stained towels and tools that didn't belong in any veterinary clinic. "She was giving birth," Elias muttered. "Tethered, no anesthetic." Amara turned away, hand covering her mouth. Elias downloaded the footage, his jaw tight. "This is the break we needed. Visual confirmation. Facility ID numbers on the crates. We can tie this to Callan's shipments. And with this, we can move federal." Owen stared at the screen, then slowly reached to shut the laptop. "We're not done yet," he said. "They don't get to hide behind cameras and shell companies. They don't get to walk away." Elias nodded. "Then we take the next step, but it's going to get dangerous, fast." "I don't care," Owen said quietly. "She suffered alone. She won't fight alone." As if on cue, Amara's phone buzzed. A message from Glenn. "Nova is okay. Pups are fed. She keeps looking at the door. I think she's waiting." Owen stared at the message for a long moment, then stepped out into the cold. The sun had begun to set, bleeding orange over the skyline. But for the first time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of a reckoning. Glenn Reyes sat at his desk beneath the gentle buzz of the clinic's overhead lights, surrounded by stacks of files that hadn't been touched in years. His hands, still steady despite his age, moved with quiet precision through a drawer labeled Archived Recovery Cases. Outside, the winter morning unfolded in gray silence, but inside the clinic, something long dormant had begun to stir. He pulled out a thick folder, its tab marked with faded ink. Transfer vertical bar, SRK, external vets, vertical bar, 2019, 2022. He hadn't thought about these dogs in so long. Rescues that came in battered, emaciated, broken. Some had been dropped off without names, others sedated with no paperwork, just a signature from a third-party handler who never returned for follow-up. Glenn had treated them all, stitched wounds, reset bones, eased their tremors, and eventually moved on, assuming they'd been survivors of backdoor abuse or roadside abandonments. But now he knew better. He laid the files out across the exam table and began cross-referencing them with the tattoo index from Nova's scan. One by one, the numbers matched. R2S018C, 019B, 020A, all dogs registered under SRK's closed program. Some had died shortly after arrival. Others had been adopted out, their new lives a fragile miracle Glenn had never understood the depth of until now. Each record now bore a different weight. These weren't just strays. They were discarded tools, the non-viables, the ones not obedient enough or broken enough to sell. And they'd been sent through clinics like his under the illusion of care. He picked up the phone. In the tiny kitchen of a borrowed mountain cabin 2 hours outside Portland, Owen poured hot water over a press of coffee grounds, watching the slow swirl of steam rise into the cold air. The cabin belonged to a friend from his firefighter days, a man named Wade, now retired in Arizona, who had left Owen the keys with a single sentence. If it ever gets too heavy, go. The place was simple: pine walls, stone hearth, 2 rooms, and a back deck overlooking a frozen creek. Amara sat cross-legged on a faded sofa, laptop balanced on her knees, the soft glow of the screen reflecting in her tired eyes. Across the room, Nova lay curled beside her pups, who had grown stronger and more alert in the days since the raid. Juno, still the smallest, had begun to toddle, his legs awkward but determined. "I think it's ready," Owen said, nodding at the coffee. "I just need 15 more minutes," Amara murmured. "It goes live at noon." She had been writing for 2 days straight, drafting, checking, rechecking. The story was her largest yet, backed by real footage, government-suppressed reports, and testimony from a federal agent who'd broken protocol to bring the truth forward. But what weighed most was the file Glenn had sent. Owen sat beside her, glancing at the headline on the screen. "From Badge to Breeder, Inside the Secret Trade of America's Forgotten Working Dogs," by Amara Quinn, Vertical Bar Portland Dispatch. He read the subheading, "A Joint Investigation into SRK Kennels, Shadow Tails Transport, and a Network of Illicit Breeding Facilities Operating Under Federal Blind Spots. It's going to make people angry," he said. "I hope so," she replied. "Anger means they're awake." The article named names: Thomas Callan, the facilities in Idaho and eastern Oregon, the shell companies routing money through decoy rescues. It included images of Nova's past, still frames from the footage Elias recovered. And most importantly, it told the stories of the other dogs, the ones who didn't survive, the ones still waiting to be rescued. At 11:58 a.m., Amara hit publish. By 12:12 p.m., it had reached 30,000 views. By 12:40 p.m., it had been picked up by 4 national outlets. By 1:15 p.m., Portland PD received a signed warrant to assist federal enforcement on a coordinated strike. The raid began at 3:02 p.m. Elias Kane was already waiting in an unmarked van near the first compound, an isolated kennel hidden behind the facade of a wildlife rescue. He stood beside Detective Lena Torres, a seasoned officer with sharp eyes and salt-streaked hair pulled into a low bun. She was built lean, walked with the swagger of someone who'd fought for every ounce of respect she carried, and had little tolerance for men like Callan. "You sure this isn't a setup?" she asked as she checked her sidearm. "I'm sure," Elias replied. "And we've got live data from Glenn's files confirming several of the dogs inside came through SRK's termination list." She nodded once, and the teams moved in. Within 20 minutes, officers had secured the perimeter, arrested 4 individuals, including a handler with ties to interstate trafficking, and begun cataloging over 83 animals found on site. Some were sick, others underfed, but none beyond saving. Inside one of the larger pens, a cage door swung open to reveal a German shepherd with cloudy eyes and a trembling stance. She was thin, her fur patchy from stress. But when she saw the approaching rescue worker, she didn't bark. She leaned forward and wagged her tail. Back in the cabin, Nova lifted her head. Owen noticed it first. She rose slowly, ears pricked, then moved to the door, sniffing at the seam where the air crept through. "She knows," Amara whispered. "Knows what?" "That it's over." Owen opened the door. The mountain wind rushed in, crisp and biting. Nova stepped out onto the porch, looking into the trees beyond the snow. Her pups waddled after her, Juno the last to emerge, stumbling but determined. "She still doesn't feel safe," Owen said softly. "Would you?" "No," he admitted, "but I can give her time." Amara walked up beside him, hands tucked into her sleeves. "What are you going to do now?" Owen looked at Nova, no longer the creature curled in the snow, but something steadier, stronger. Then he looked at her pups. "I've been asking myself that since I found her," he said. "Maybe the better question is, what do they need me to do?" That night, Glenn sat at his desk again, watching a news report play on mute. Headlines scrolled across the screen. Trafficking network exposed. Routine federal action underway. Dozens of dogs rescued in Portland crackdown. He opened a manila envelope and pulled out a new folder labeled simply Juno. He wrote the first note: born to survive, chosen to begin again. In the woods, beneath stars finally visible through the clearing storm, Nova curled around her pups beneath the porch of the cabin. Above her, in the quiet house, Owen closed his eyes to the sound of wind in the trees, and to the fragile peace of knowing that, for the first time in years, he wasn't running from anything. He was finally running toward something. The snow had melted from the streets of Portland by the time the last suspect from the Shadowtails network was arrested. What remained in its place was something harder to define. Light, maybe, or justice. Or perhaps just the stillness that follows a storm long overdue. The headlines that week were relentless. Local stations aired footage of cages being carried out of dim kennels and transport vans being seized under federal order. Photos of battered dogs filled the screens, but so did images of rescue, of hands reaching gently into cages, of tails cautiously wagging for the first time in months. The name Shadowtails had become a symbol, and so had Nova. Her photo, taken by Amara on the night of the first raid, was now framed in the foyer of the Portland Dispatch building, a black and tan German shepherd with one paw protectively over her pups, eyes sharp, not broken. The caption beneath it read, "She survived so they could live." Amara Quinn sat in a television studio waiting room, wearing a dark navy suit, the kind that made her look older than 26. Her hair was pulled back, her face free of makeup, save a thin layer of foundation to mute the shadows beneath her eyes. She hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in weeks. Across from her sat a producer with a clipboard and a coffee stain down his sleeve. "We'll go live in 10, he said. "Just keep it simple. Mention the dogs, say something hopeful." Amara gave a small nod. "That's all I ever wanted." She was introduced to the public that day as the lead investigator behind Justice for the Forgotten, a campaign born from her reporting, now expanding into a nationwide initiative to end the abuse of retired working animals. She hadn't asked for the spotlight, but she also knew that with it came the power to protect more Novas. She would wield it like a blade if she had to. Back in the hills beyond Estacada, the cabin still stood, now no longer a hideout, but a home. Owen had cleared the space behind the deck and built a proper enclosure, sturdy fencing, a heated doghouse, and a line of toys that trailed across the snowless ground like breadcrumbs from a better life. Inside, Nova lay in the sun with 2 of her pups nestled against her side. Blue, the boldest of the litter, now nearly indistinguishable from his mother in both color and spirit, had taken to patrolling the fence like a miniature guardian. Juno, still the smallest, preferred Owen's shadow, following him from truck to woodpile and back again. Owen stood at the counter of the cabin's kitchen, brewing tea instead of coffee now. Something in him had shifted. He still wore the same battered jacket, still rose before sunrise. But there was a gentleness in his stride, a slowness to his speech, as though time had unclenched its grip on him. He looked down at the adoption papers on the table. Nova, official. Blue, checked. Juno, completed. 3 names written in ink that would not fade. He stepped out into the morning, boots crunching lightly on thawed soil. Nova lifted her head as he approached and gave a low, soft bark. Just once, enough to let him know she saw him. He knelt beside her and rested a hand against her shoulder. "We're staying," he said, almost to himself. "No more running, no more hiding." A few miles south, in a modest house tucked between 2 overgrown hedgerows, Glenn Reyes opened the side gate to his yard and whistled softly. 2 pups came barreling around the corner. Ash, the long-legged one with a white streak across his snout, and Dot, a quiet girl with sharp eyes and a strange love for chasing falling leaves. They were stronger now, fed and fearless, their early trauma tucked somewhere deeper, almost forgotten. Glenn knelt to meet them, scratching behind their ears. "You're not test subjects anymore," he said. "You're mine." His home was quiet but not lonely. Every morning he walked the dogs. Every afternoon he answered calls from newly accredited rescue centers asking for guidance. And every evening he sent a text to Owen, a joke, a weather update, a reminder that the line was always open. Sometimes Owen responded, sometimes not, but always the message was read. The man who had once owned Shadowtails sat in a cell in Multnomah County, awaiting federal transport. Thomas Callan, once the invisible puppeteer of dogs, manifests, and backroom trades, had traded his pinstripe suit for an orange jumpsuit. He no longer spoke much, his silence now a kind of armor, or perhaps a cage he had built himself. His name was no longer whispered, it was shouted, condemned, and, most importantly, remembered. Elias Kane sat in a government office in Washington, D.C., wearing a badge that had been stripped from him months earlier, now reissued without ceremony. The room smelled like bureaucracy and old coffee, but for once, he didn't mind. His role had shifted, Director of Animal Trafficking Intelligence, Federal Division, a title that didn't exist before because no one had thought it needed to. Elias had thought it did. He glanced at the monitor on his desk. A news headline flickered across the top. Amara Quinn's report sparks new federal legislation for canine protection. He leaned back in his chair, a rare smile tugging at his lips. He didn't believe in happy endings, but he did believe in justice. And that, he had learned, was something you had to fight for tooth and nail, sometimes in the dark, sometimes from behind a desk. He pulled out a photo from his drawer. Nova, with her pups. "They saved us too," he said quietly. That evening in the still quiet of the Oregon hills, Owen lit a small fire in the outdoor pit. Nova lay beside him, head resting on his boot, her ears flicking lazily at the night's sounds. Blue slept curled by the fire, and Juno sat between Owen's knees, content to watch the flames, with eyes too old for his young body. Amara arrived just after dusk, pulling up in a dusty rental. She stepped out with a canvas bag over one shoulder and her coat zipped to the neck. "You didn't have to drive out here," Owen said, standing to meet her. "I needed to," she replied. "It's too quiet in the city." She handed him the bag. Inside was a framed copy of her article's first page, printed in grayscale. Beneath the headline was a quote, "She was born into obedience, but she chose her own freedom." Owen smiled, then looked at Nova. She did more than that. She gave it to the rest of us. They sat around the fire for a while, sharing quiet stories, toasted bread, and an understanding that needed no words. Overhead, the stars blinked between slow-moving clouds, and the wind no longer howled. Nova dozed with her family around her, and for the first time in a long time, the snow didn't come. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or flashes of light. They arrive in silence, in the shape of a wounded dog shielding her newborns in the snow, in the hands of a broken man learning how to love again. Nova wasn't just rescued, she was sent. Sent to remind us that no life is too damaged to be redeemed, and no heart is too hardened for God to soften. What man discarded, heaven still cherished. So if today feels cold, if you're carrying grief, or wondering if anything good can come from broken things, remember Nova, remember Juno, and remember the man who simply said yes when the moment came. Because sometimes, when you choose compassion, you become someone's miracle. May the Lord bless everyone watching this video. May He guide your steps, soften your burdens, and send you the grace you didn't know you needed. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of hope, healing, and the quiet ways God still moves. And share this video with someone who needs a reminder that God still works through the most unexpected hearts. May He bless you, today and always. Amen. 9,